Okay, hi again, guys. So you should have this document in front of you. This is your study guide. Again, your test is next week on Wednesday, Thursday, depending on if you're in first period or third period. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and do some of these with you. So in a perfect world, you would pause the video and try to answer them before I do, but I want to make sure you have some correct answers for a few and some examples of how to do some for, a few from each section. So if you look at the first page, we're first going to look at some of this vocabulary. So you know what parallel means? Perpendicular. Skew, remember, means like when you have lines that are not on the same plane. So you can't draw skew lines on a piece of paper. So there's not going to be anything on this review packet that's skew because there's no way to draw a line that's not on the paper. Then we just have intersecting lines, which means they just cross but aren't specifically perpendicular. And then we have all those angle relationships that we learned about. So let's look at lines B and C. I'm going to highlight them. So if you want to take a different color, you can, or you can just look at mine. So here's B right here, and here's C right here. So if you look at it, they look perpendicular, but we know for sure, because since those are perpendicular, we know that's perpendicular there. So for the first one, we know that B and C are perpendicular. Okay, so now for the next one, we're going to look at C and D. So if you look at C and D, you can clearly see that they don't intersect. And if you look carefully, you see these symbols here, which means that they're parallel. Okay, so now we're going to look at A and B. Highlight those, and we can see if I extend them with A and B, you can see, sorry that's not perfect, you can see that they're going to intersect. And they're not going to intersect, this right here is not a right angle, so they're not perpendicular, they're just intersecting. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of the angles. And my recommendation would be to take your pencil for the next few questions and highlight or darken the angles that we're dealing with, or the lines that we're dealing with, because we're dealing with 2 and 6, so we know that these are the parallel lines we're dealing with, and then this is going to be our transversal. So if you highlight it or darken it, it doesn't have to be different colors, then it just draws your eyes to those relationships that we learned. Now we're going to look at angles 2 and 6. So here's 2 and here's 6. If you draw your rectangle, we can see automatically those are exterior angles. And since they're on opposite sides of the blue line, these are alternate exterior angles. Now if we look at 3 and 6, oops, I just want to get rid of those. So these are alternate exterior. And now if we look at 3 and 6, we can see again, if we make this the rectangle, that 3 is an interior angle, and 6 is an exterior. So the relationship that has one interior and one exterior, but still on the same side of that blue line, is corresponding. So those are corresponding angles when we're looking at 3 and 6. Now let's look at 3 and 8. So we have 3 and 8. So we can see they're inside the box. So we know they're interior, and they're on opposite sides of that blue line. So those are called alternate interior angles. Okay, so remember those 5 relationships, and you have your purple sheet if you want to use it as a reference while you're doing this study guide. So now we're comparing here C and D. So first, again, I'm going to highlight. You can just look at mine, or you can darken it on your paper. So if we look at C and D, we know that those are parallel. Now it's telling us that the slope of line C is -1/3, so what would the slope of line D be? Well, what did we just learn about the slopes of parallel lines? We know that those are the same. So if C is 1/3, then D is -1/3, sorry. Now let's look at B and D. So now we're looking at B and D, and we know that those are perpendicular. So if the slope of b is negative 2 over 3, remember to get the slope of a perpendicular line, you need to go from positive to negative and flip the fraction. So if this is a negative, we're going to have a positive, and then we're going to flip the 2 over 3 and make it 3 over 2. Okay, you guys can look at, if you look at 9 and 10 now, we're looking at the parallel lines again. So now you're just applying the 5 relationships that we learned with parallel lines. Okay, so if angle 5 is 135, so we're looking here at 5 being 135, you can label it with your pencil if you want, then it's asking for angle 2. So if this is 135, I know that this one's 135 because those are corresponding. And then you do 180 minus 135. So I'm just going to write that here so you can know how you got the answer. And 180 minus 135 is 45. So here the angle, if 1 is 135, then 2 would be 45. Now let's erase that and go to the next one, where we're looking at if angle 1 is 140, so if this is 140, then what would angle 7 be? So we're looking at this angle here. So again, if this is 140, aren't these alternate exterior? Again, if I make my box here, you can see that those angles are outside and they're on opposite sides of my transversal, so we know they're congruent. So if 1 is 140, then 7 is 140. Let's look at 14, 15, and 16. I'm not going to do all of these because we've done some examples like this already, but if you look at 15, what I need you to do is circle yes or no, or just write yes or no, and then give the reason. So here you need to identify what kind of angles this angle and this angle, what the angle type is. So you can see they're on the same side of my transversal, and if we make the box, you have one interior and one exterior, so remember those are called corresponding, and corresponding angles are supposed to be congruent. So since 68 is not equal to 70, the lines are not parallel. So actually, sorry, you can just write no, and then you can say corresponding angles are not congruent. And you can abbreviate the corresponding if you want. I just want to make sure it's clear. But those lines would not be parallel because the corresponding angles are not congruent. All right, let's go look at number 28. So 28 is a little bit of a weird one. That's why I chose it, so that you could work together. So we can do it together, because the parallel lines are not horizontal. So again, if you highlight or somehow trace the transversal, that can help you to decide where the angles are. And then if we make our rectangle, you can kind of see that this angle, that's the 21x plus 7, and this angle that are 17x plus 35 are alternate interior, because they're both on the interior and they're on opposite sides of that transversal. So if you remember, with alternate interior, or you can look at your purple sheet, we know that they're equal. So we're going to write an equation that sets them equal to each other. So you have 21x plus 7 equals 17x plus 35. Okay? So while I'm solving that, you guys can solve that. So pause the video, take a minute. You can either go to Desmos and solve it, or you can do it by hand. But you should get that x is 7. Okay, so now we're going to focus on how to find y, which is right next to it. So the first thing that you have to do is find this angle right here that's labeled, let me use a different color, that's labeled with the 17x plus 35. So what you're going to do is plug in your x value. So we're going to do 17 times 7 plus 35. So you can use the calculator, or you can use Desmos to figure that out. We're going to do 17 times 7 plus 35, and we're going to get 154. So if this is 154, isn't y right across from it? Y is vertical from it, so then y is also going to be 154 because they're vertical angles. Okay, so let's go up to number 34. These are the problems that we just did today, that you just learned. So we're determining if the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. If you look at 34, do you see how these are both in standard form, which is ax plus by equals c? If you remember, those are the ones that you can't just look at and see the slope. So the easiest way to approach this question is to go to Desmos and then just look at the lines. So I'm going to type in 2x plus 7y equals 5. And then in the second line, I'm going to do negative 4x plus 14y equals 10. So now if you look at the lines, they're definitely not parallel, and you can kind of see by looking right here that that is not a 90-degree angle. So these lines are not parallel or perpendicular. So for this, we're going to say neither. Okay, so you guys can try 35 on your own where you do the same thing. Use Desmos to type it in. Looking at the rest of this study guide, we'll do some of them together in class on Tuesday. So the next page from 36 to 40 are some trickier problems. So you can try some of those, or you can wait until we're all back in class together on Tuesday and we can do some together. And then this very last page is just review. So distance and midpoint and slope. And then these last from 43 on are the second kind of problem that we had to do, where you have to write an equation. So let me do 43 and 46 for you, and then you can work on your own. So 43, if it's parallel, we know that we're going to have the same slope. So remember, a negative x, the slope would be negative 1, and here's our point. We're going to cross this equation off because now we're done with it. We're going to label the point, this is x1, y1, and it doesn't tell us, it just says an equation, so you can pick the best one. Here they give us a point and a slope, so the best one is point slope form. So we're going to say y minus negative 4 turns into plus 4 equals your m, which is negative 1, and then x minus 3, and then you're done. There's no other work to do because it doesn't tell us to use a different form that's not point slope form. So now if we look at 46, it's the same kind of problem except now it's perpendicular. So we're going to take that slope, which is 3 over 1, we're going to flip it and turn it from positive to negative. So it's going to turn into, trying to make some more space for myself. This is 3 over 1. It's going to turn into negative 1 over 3. And then here's my x1 and y1, and I'm done with that equation, so cross it off. We don't need the other information. So now we're going to go y minus negative 5 turns into a plus 5. We use the slope that we just figured out, negative 1 over 3, and then x minus 3. Okay, so 49 and 50 are just repeats again, where you can go to Desmos and just type them in to see if they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither, which means they'll just be intersecting. So now you guys can go back and fill in some of the blanks on the study guide, and then this is not due until the day of the test, which will be next week on Thursday for first period, and then probably actually Thursday, Friday for third period. So it's not due till that day, and we'll work on it in class next week. So get as much done as you can today. You should at least be able to finish up to, somewhere in the mid-20s. 29 maybe is a good goal. But if you don't get that far, that's okay. We'll finish working on them next week. Have a great weekend.